The Gillard government wants to reboot in the wake of the leadership challenge, but it's still having to deal with self-inflicted wounds, like an offer made and then withdrawn for former New South Wales Premier Bob Carr to join the Gillard ministry. Today it was also forced to defend a decision to shut down a solar rebate scheme without warning. The industry says hundreds of jobs might be lost. Political editor Heather Hewitt reports.
If she can't run this successfully, how can she be trusted to run a carbon tax?
Post the Kevin Rudd challenge, the Prime Minister assured Australian voters the government would get on with the job, focus on them, and everything would get back to normal. Well, it has, with the fallout from the closure of a rebate scheme for solar hot water heaters.
This was meant to be the week in which the Prime Minister re-established her authority in Australia, and what is the first thing they do? They go ahead and they cut a very important scheme for the support of Australian manufacturing.
The Greens are kicking and screaming, so is the solar industry, and so are consumers, over last night's announcement that the scheme introduced under the Howard government would wrap up mid-year.
This solar hot water service rebate is a time-limited program. It was always intended to end at the end of 5 years, and it's now drawing to an end on the 30th of June this year. This
scheme was very important because solar hot water is a great way to not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but it absolutely allows householders to reduce their power bills.
This is good budget practice to shut a program of this nature in this way.
Just try telling that to the manufacturers who'd been lobbying for an extension and expected the government to agree.
Look, I don't want to talk about job cuts just at the moment, but I think it's fairly obvious that if there isn't a market to sell product into, there's no point in making the product.
Ream Australia employs 1,200 people across 5 manufacturing sites, including this factory at Parramatta. Solar hot water and heat pumps account for more than half their business.
This was one of the few struts that was still holding up our industry. We've been battered by, our exports have been battered by high Australian dollar. We've been subject to a lot of imports coming in at very low cost, also because of the dollar. We've had oversubscribed PV programs that have damaged our competitiveness vis-a-vis PV and solar panels. This was the last nail in the coffin for us.
Subsidies for anything are always going to end in tears for everybody, whether that's for the government who's providing the subsidy or whether it's for the industry that's receiving the subsidy. The inherent nature of these things, that they tend to happen that way.
The manufacturers did know the scheduled end date was 2012, but after the pink bats debacle, an issue like this takes on an added dimension and raises the question of whether the government should be involved in the first place.
The government ends up with a policy outcome which they're being blamed, whereas in fact what they've done is actually supported something for quite a few years. And industry ends up in a bad place because inevitably they gear up on the basis that they hope the subsidy or the rebate will be extended, and when it doesn't come, then they get, not surprisingly, quite upset about that. And people whose employment is based upon these sorts of rebates, not surprisingly, get upset as well. So it's almost a recipe for disaster.
It's also a recipe for an onslaught from the opposition in the Parliament, even though the Howard government had initially set the time frame for the scheme.
How can the Prime Minister say that this scheme was always due to close on the 30th of June this year, when this document from the Department of Climate Change and Energy Efficiency clearly shows that the scheme was funded into the next financial year to the tune of $24.5 million. Caught out, Prime Minister. Caught out yet again.
Some provision was made in the forward estimates, I would assume, because like other subsidy programs, some provision is made for claims that are affected after the 30th of June.
It wasn't going to end there. The opposition was also having a field day with media reports that former New South Wales Premier Bob Carr had been invited to join the Gillard team and fill the vacancy created by Senator Mark Bibb's surprise resignation on Monday.
Given that Bob Carr has confirmed he was approached to be Foreign Minister, will the Prime Minister inform the House why she believes Bob Carr would make a better Foreign Minister than any of her colleagues?
Whoever I select won't break into a sweat wiping the floor with her.
The government is furious that word of the approach to Bob Carr leaked when discussions were in preliminary stages. Some ministers are privately blaming Rudd supporters for mischief-making and somehow being responsible for this report in one newspaper claiming there'd been a rebellion over plans to offer Bob Carr the plum Foreign Affairs job instead of Defence Minister Stephen Smith.
Completely untrue. I've just said completely untrue. And let me make this very clear. Of course, my door is open to talk to people as I work my way through the reshuffle, but the decisions are mine and I'll make them.
Julia Gillard did call Bob Carr on Monday after he was initially sounded out by the leadership of the New South Wales ALP branch. Many of the Prime Minister's team thought it was a good idea and there was no so-called mutiny. But once word of the conversations leaked, the move was killed stone dead and Bob Carr was told it was all off. It's certainly a look the government could do without as it tries to start afresh. Late today, former ALP National President and Aboriginal advocate Warren Mundine nominated to fill the vacancy, and there'll be others.